You are Kaho. You have been sent to the city of Karst to discover if they are harboring weapons of mass destruction that could threaten your small town to the west. Your Uber driver drops you off outside the city in a forest because you said you don't do tips. Your only weapon is a leaf because in a twist of terror, you are Canadian. Once you immediately discover you cannot swim, the true Dark Souls, the true Momodora begins. It is a game full of secret passages, and it introduces this to you in a subtle way. Seeing this somewhat obvious passage towards the bottom of the room instantly clues you in to look for alternate routes throughout the game. The rest of the secrets are a lot more complicated than this, being gated behind hidden walls or special moves you need to acquire, but it's definitely realistic for you to find them all without a guide, which makes the exploration quite engaging, especially when you stumble on something like some guy you can just eternally beat the life out of. This is a staple of what everyone calls the Hollow Knight genre. Games like Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night were heavily inspired by Hollow Knight's non-linear gameplay. Momodora, which released a year before Hollow Knight, was also inspired by it. This non-linearity is where the game really shines. Once you get to the city, you need to find 4 pieces of a crest to access the assumed WMD stockpile. These are each spread across 4 separate zones behind 4 separate bosses. This is fairly standard fare when it comes to Hollow Knight clones, but Momodora is different in that there are only 2 traversal abilities. You can unlock the ability to air dash, which helps you close long distances and dodge enemy attacks. You are also able to turn into a cat, which helps you close long distances and be a cat. Outside of these 2 abilities, the only other gates in the game are literally gates, which you can open using keys you need to find. Because of this, you aren't really forced to play through the game in any particular order. If you remember earlier when we found out Canadians can't swim, it turns out this wasn't entirely true. One of the areas is entirely underwater. Pretty much every time I have revisited this game over the years, I forget about this zone, and whenever I run past the entrance to it, I assume that Kaho will die instantly because she can't swim, so I never enter it. As a result, I do pretty much every other zone first, and get stuck because I have no idea how to progress. Then when I finally do enter it, I don't realize you have infinite jumps underwater, so I get stuck again, until I suddenly remember that, actually, Canadians are really good at swimming. My point is, if I realized that Canadians are great swimmers, my initial path through the game's world would have been completely different. This is what I love about Hollow Knight clones. This non-linearity also integrates really well with the combat. The only items you have access to in this game are passive items and active items. Active items can be used to activate an ability, while passive items are always running. Kind of like that program you installed 6 months ago and only used once, but you don't want to uninstall it because you might use it one more time in the next 2 years. Some of these items can be quite powerful, and they refresh every time you ring a bonfire, so you never have that decision paralysis over when to use them. You have your basic Estus flasks, and later in the game you even find a separate item that fully heals you, but these are fairly boring compared to what else you get. Once you enter the city of Karst, you can buy an item from the first merchant, which will temporarily boost your damage. Along the same vein, you can also get an item that sacrifices your health to increase damage. These are pretty useful, but sometimes you just have to unleash your personal weapons of mass destruction. There is a passive item which increases your damage while draining your health. This can stack with the active item damage buffs as well, so you can quickly imagine all sorts of nukes you can unleash on the bosses. And this is only scratching the surface. The boss fights in this game are pretty good. They all have unique designs and movesets. Their attacks are well telegraphed, so you can learn to consistently avoid them. But the best part about the boss fights is how they encourage mastery. Each boss drops a special item if you beat it without getting hit. These can allow you to spike your power quite early, or gain access to an interesting special move. At first you might think this is frustrating, because for a lot of these items, your only chance to get them is from this challenge. If you fail, you can't get them later in the game, but it's a really great system for replays. On a second playthrough, it really encourages you to learn the moves of each boss until you know the tell of each telegraph and how to safely navigate the move, while leveraging all of your tools to end the fight as soon as possible. The first zone of the game is Sacred Ordalia Grove. It is inhabited by tomatoes and goblins. It's a fairly linear tutorial that walks you through the mechanics of the game. For example, there is this moment of strand-type gameplay where you can observe arrows left by a Norman Reedus and infer that you need to shoot the orb above them. We are truly connected. There are quite a few unique enemy types here. You have goblins that throw knives or fart gas at you. There is also this big lad. You don't have to fight him, but for deeply personal reasons that I will not get into, I really don't like tomato sauce, so I did what we in the business call murder, and I murdered him. At the end of the zone, you meet arthropod demon Adea. You can just kind of hang back and spam arrows at her from across the arena. She will summon voluminous pillars of fart gas behind you to stop this though, but it's not a big deal because she is really bad at the game. You just have to walk backwards and jump occasionally. Her lore tells us that she betrayed her own people, so they just chucked her into this sacred grove. Right after this battle without honor or humanity, you meet Sans Undertale. He is a sleep maxer. This is the generic standard issue tragic backstory NPC, but like every tragic backstory, we only find out more when we head to specific locations on the map later in the game. Now we can finally enter the city of Karst and find some WMDs. The city of Karst appears to sit next to a lake or the ocean. The ancient founders constructed it here because they thought the 2D reflection shader looked really cool. It's mainly inhabited by sentient amalgamations of red cordial vapor and really annoying witches. They can attack you from quite far away. Their purpose is to serve as this game's dedicated annoying enemy, haunting your traversal across this rundown city. You see, the Queen of Karst was possessed by a dark WMD. This resulted in a curse enveloping the city, which has slowly spread out towards Kaho's homeland. In order to stop this, Kaho needs to ask the Queen to chill. However, the path to the castle is blocked behind a magic wall that requires a crest to open. In order to find out more about this, we can head to a nearby monastery. However, on the way we get ambushed by a demonic rat thing. You just kind of beat the life out of it with your leaf, and then it drowns. However, it's not over, for his master arrives, along with her weapons of mass destruction. The main way you damage Lubella is by hitting her weapons of mass destruction. I guess we end up bruising them because she gets frustrated and leaves. After this fight, we meet a knightess called Kath. She'll just insult you and whine about the state of the city. I assume this is what it's like for a tourist talking to a local in Paris. As you head further into the city, you can find some survivors. One of these is Paramount. He points us towards his master who can tell us more about how to reach the queen. She resides in a monastery full of nuns, and you have to walk past them while they spread the good word of Saint Esselin. It's sort of like when you are at a train station and get approached by a preacher who just keeps talking at you while you look into the distance with a dead-eyed stare. Kaho is a priestess, so she already has enough religion. At the back of the monastery, you can meet Kotia. She somehow clocks Kaho's exact genetic makeup just from looking at her face. That's definitely giving me a really weird vibe. Then she gives us a key before whining about the city, in a way that kind of confirms the weird vibe she gave off. From this point on, we are free to pursue the crest paths in any way we wish. I started with the Cinder Chambers, which is below the monastery. Every city has a dedicated underground fire worship area. If you weren't aware of this, you probably just haven't joined the right cult yet. The zone is sand-colored and has these puffs of smoke or steam that look like dust, so mentally I always associated it with a sandy desert, despite it not being that at all. I imagine this is what it's like to sign to a football club in the middle of a desert, only to realize it's all shopping malls and the occasional contractually enslaved migrant worker. The boss of this zone gives you a certified Sigurd of Katarina moment. You can basically stand back and let them tank the boss for you, while you fling arrows at them. I know what this looks like. Yes, this is the second boss where you can just stand on one end of the arena and spam arrows. Trust me, the rest of them are a lot more engaging. After this, you become best friends with Sieglind of Katarina. she decides to leave the service of the queen because, in her words, she is off the perk. Sieglind of Katarina will also info dump about how you need the crest pieces to access the queen. What a helpful young lady. I sure hope nothing happens to her. Conveniently, in the next room is the first crest piece, which gives you the ability to air dash. After this, you can get exposed to a filter room. Basically, when you enter it, you need to shoot some barrels in order to blow up the wall. However, if you are like me, you will just assume that you need an ability to get past it and file it away for later, which will then result in you wasting 20 minutes running around the map looking for the key that is behind it, therefore getting filtered as a fake fan of Hollow Knight clones. The next area I headed to was the Forlorn Monastery. This is probably the smallest zone in the game. The bottom half of it is literally just a church where you can go to Sunday Mass, sit in some pews, listen to some nuns, sit in some more pews. I'm not a pew guy though, so I headed up the elevator to the dedicated demon attic that every monastery has. From here you can go either left or right. Going left will just lead you to a massive bell. You can hit it and it will ring. That's basically it. This won't even summon any weird serpent goblin creatures. Going to the right will result in you crossing a few rooms until you come to the boss, which is basically a Giga Nun. She gets really angry at us because she thinks we are an atheist, so she attacks us with her holy blood red sword of not evil. I initially struggled with her fight, but it's actually quite fun once you learn her patterns. Defeating her gives you a crest piece that makes your bow stronger. It was at this point I had to learn to swim. I had to become Canadian in order to enter the disgusting sewer dungeon. Yes, just like that very same place, the one that imprisoned that foul being. Only this time the people jailed here are the generic standard issue tragic backstory NPC and some guy. However, before all of that, we meet a friendly escapee who reveals that this whole time we have been wearing fake Jordans. We journey further into the sewer, encased in the thick sludge of the self-delusion that gave way to that enlightening revelation. This zone has a mix between underwater areas and the jail. We can free the generic standard issue tragic backstory NPC after hitting an illusory wall and shooting an orb. He talks about his dead wife or something. Whatever, man. Who cares? The other guy begs us to free him. With all his soul he pleads for freedom. Naturally, there is no way to do this, and if you return here later, the boss here is called Derelict Frida. She does have some additional enemies in her arena, but for the most part you just dodge her chest lasers until she hits that thing and vanishes. There isn't much info about her, but the item she drops after a perfect defeat states that she was doomed worthless and thrown into the tombs underneath the capital, and that it's hard to tell if she was ever human. Sounds like a certain guy with a weird diet. In this area you can find the garden key, which opens up the next zone. It's called Whiteleaf Memorial Park, so naturally you can find our favorite crybaby standing at his wife's grave. He doesn't really say anything, and if you come back later you can find his drip on her grave. Unfortunately, we cannot steal it. After exploring the area you will come across a suspicious platform. Yes, this insane woman is back, and we need to defuse her weapons of mass destruction. Her lore is basically that she is an immortal witch. That's it. She just decided to show up here after the Queen's curse overtook the city. She did not have any hand in the disaster at all. Lubella doesn't even have a tragic backstory. I think she just really wanted to show us what she's got. So she basically just exists to be used in every single thumbnail for every video on this game. Personally, I would never include her in my thumbnail. After you defeat her, she curses you and makes you a cat. This might sound bad, but this cat has hands. Once you escape the cat dungeon, you can now backtrack to the start of the game. On the way, you can find the person who called out our fake J's. They are depressed now. Fortunately, we can cure their depression with a single word. Isn't therapy great? Sacred Ordalia Grove is protected from the corruption wrought by the Queen. This is because in the past it was a place of worship, and we can travel back in time to get there through the power of Cat. It's home to terrifying primordial beings like these floating plant things, and more tomatoes. However, during this time period they were referred to as tomatoes. It is here you can find the final crest fragment. This grants you the ability to fast travel, which means you don't need to climb that ladder if you really don't want to. Now we can finally enter the castle, or at least we can enter the gallery that leads to the castle's only entrance. Yeah, the only way to meet the queen is by being forced to admire her vast collection of art. And to make matters worse, you get sassed up by the receptionist. Says the chick sitting in a room with disgusting throbbing eggs. Get your house in order before you speak my name. Some of the enemies in here look a bit like derelict Frida. The eggs also look like something you find on her during the fight, so this potentially hints at Frida's origins being that of an art gallery curator who fell from grace when she decided to lay a bunch of eggs around the art gallery for some reason. She was then fired and never got to meet her children that now roam its halls. Goes to show that you shouldn't put all your eggs in one art gallery. The boss of this area is Duchess Lupia and Royal Huntress Magnolia. Lupia spends most of the fight desperately rolling around trying to punch you. She's really struggling for her life, while Magnolia just kind of stands at the top, occasionally throwing a few arrows in our general direction. Once Lupia is defeated, Magnolia will jump down and just hold out her knife hoping that you walk into it. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, they are really bad at the game. Finally, we can move on to the castle. This is probably the toughest area in the game. It has the most punishing platforming sequences along with some of the toughest enemies. Video games tend to put their biggest challenges at the end. For example, the hardest boss in Elden Ring is only accessible once you have completed most of the game. Or how you have to take a shower for the first time in a year after uninstalling League of Legends. On your way to the Queen, you can find your old friend. All in all, that wasn't too traumatizing, and we even got a free healing item. I gotta do that more often. At the end of the zone, the accursed Queen of Cast waits for us, which is funny because it's accursed instead of accursed, so it's a perfect rhyme. Basically, this world-destroying demonic queen changed her name so it would rhyme. Okay, that's mad corny. This is what happens if you let a demon possess an English major. If you let it possess an engineering major, you just get whatever this abomination is. There are two phases to the fight, and it can be kind of tough, but because of this, it becomes the perfect testing ground for all of your broken items. She is basically just your punching bag. Once you are done bullying her, for some reason Kaho decides to run the other way, and the queen stabs her in the back. Then they both collapse, and that's the end of the game. Kaho failed and the curse spread over the world. Oh no, I can't believe it ended like that. That is such a bad ending. Oh, so that's why the ending was bad. This naturally implies that there is a good ending. To get it, you need to become French Canadian. This might sound scary, but just let it happen. Let it wash over you. A cat in the castle area points us in this direction. To begin your transmutation, you first need to find a fart in a box. I'm not kidding, it's literally called sealed wind. You then take it to this random windmill. If you release the fart, it will turn the windmill, which opens up a secret door below, where you can dip your leaf into mate tea. In a surprising twist, you don't become French Canadian, you are Argentinian. This naturally turns your leaf green. Now when you fight the queen, the rich aroma of your mate tea awakens a third phase in her boss fight. This is the ultimate personification of evil, and it just sort of menacingly floats there while you whack it for a minute straight. Once you defeat it, you get flashbanged, and then it cuts to Kaho exorcising the evil from the queen. She takes it into herself and then fast travels to Braville. The queen has been cured and the curse has been vanquished. Kaho was successful, but at a great cost to herself, for now she eternally resides in Braville, a truly terrible place. Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is a good game. The sequel called Moonlit Farewell released recently as well. All of the games in the series are fairly short, so it's not a hard franchise to get into, and definitely something you could delve into over a weekend. You should give it a shot if you are a fan of games inspired by Hollow Knight, like Super Metroid or Symphony of the Night, which were inspired by Hollow Knight. You should also subscribe to my channel, it would look great on your resume.